King Charles has released documents confirming Queen Camilla will be transferring her royal tit to Kate Middleton as she evacuates the royal palace. Welcome viewers to my channel. Please subscribe, like my video, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next update. The first whispers began not with an official announcement, but with confusion. Early one morning, long before the statement was released, palace staff noticed subtle but undeniable signs that something monumental was about to happen. A convoy of black cars had arrived unusually early at Buckingham Palace, their tinted windows concealing faces even the most experienced royal aides couldn't recognize. Inside, corridors once bustling with routine calm were suddenly charged with tension. Schedules were cleared, phones rang with coded instructions. Something was shifting, and no one dared to say it aloud. By mid-morning, the atmosphere in London's royal district had changed completely. Reporters stationed outside the palace gates noticed senior aides coming and going in rapid succession, their expressions grim and hurried. Within hours, word began to circulate through the media grapevine that an emergency meeting had been held inside the king's private chambers. Rumors spread like wildfire, each one more dramatic than the last. Some claimed it was a health issue concerning the monarch. Others speculated about a political dispute between royal advisors and government ministers. But then, as midday approached, a carefully worded statement appeared on the royal family's official website. The opening line stunned the world. It confirmed what no one had expected. Queen Camilla would be stepping back from her duties and transferring her royal title to Catherine, Princess of Wales. The statement carried King Charles's signature and the unmistakable weight of finality. For a moment, the internet froze under the weight of disbelief. Analysts scrambled to verify its authenticity. News anchors stumbled through the wording as they read it live. For a brief second, even the tone of Buckingham Palace's communications seemed almost human, less polished, more urgent, as though the words themselves carried heartbreak. The British public was left in collective shock. This was not a rumor or a royal reshuffling. This was a seismic redefinition of power within the monarchy. In modern royal history, no queen consort had ever formally transferred her title while her husband still reigned. Abdications were known, transitions after death, yes, but this was unprecedented. And in that moment, every protocol, every line of succession, every assumption about royal permanence felt suddenly fragile. Inside the palace, the atmosphere was a strange mix of silence and chaos. Courtiers moved quietly, their footsteps echoing down the long marble corridors. Staff who had served both Charles and Camilla for decades found themselves lost in the moment. Some wept quietly, others carried on mechanically, gathering files, removing personal items, avoiding eye contact. The weight of unspoken questions filled every room. Why had this happened now? What had prompted the Queen's withdrawal? And more importantly, why had Charles chosen to make it public rather than allowing it to unfold discreetly, as royal transitions often do? Those who had been close to Camilla described her final hours in the palace as composed, but deeply emotional. She had been seen walking through the Queen's gallery alone, pausing before certain portraits, ones that had once sparked public debate about her right to be there. There was an almost poetic irony to it. The woman who had fought so hard to be accepted by the institution was now choosing to step away from it of her own accord. Or perhaps, as some insiders quietly suggested, she had no real choice at all. As the world absorbed the news, the palace gates became a theater of emotion. Crowds gathered with flowers, cameras, and handwritten letters. Some came to express gratitude, others confusion. A few came to protest what they perceived as betrayal of duty, of the late Queen Elizabeth's legacy, or of tradition itself. Every emotion the monarchy could evoke was now laid bare on the streets of London, and through it all, the palace remained silent. The press coverage grew feverish. Networks replayed archival footage of Camilla and Charles's wedding. They analyzed every past interview, searching for clues that might explain this sudden unraveling. A royal historian on one broadcast remarked, "This feels like the end of an era we never truly understood." Another pointed out that Charles's tone in the signed document carried both authority and sorrow. A king acting out of necessity, not desire. Behind the public spectacle, however, lay a private tragedy. Those who had witnessed Charles and Camilla's marriage evolve over the decades knew how much they had endured to reach the throne together. From scandal and public outrage to eventual acceptance, their love story had been both condemned and celebrated. To see it fracture under the immense pressure of monarchy was, to many, heartbreaking, but within that heartbreak was something else: resolve. King Charles's decision to make the documents public was not impulsive. It was deliberate, and it had a purpose that went beyond emotion. The most immediate reaction within the royal family came from Prince William and Kate. Their household was notified shortly before the public announcement, giving them mere minutes to prepare for the media onslaught. According to one aide, Kate's initial reaction was stunned silence. She reportedly reread the statement several times before whispering, "He wouldn't have done this unless he had to." Those words, quiet yet profound, hinted at an understanding that perhaps only someone within the family could grasp. Prince William, ever protective of his wife, was said to have been torn between concern for his father and the enormous implications this decision carried for their own future. In a single stroke, Kate had gone from being the future queen to the official heir to the title of queen consort. It was an honor wrapped in uncertainty. For all her composure in public, those close to her later revealed that she spent that evening in private reflection, aware that her life and the monarchy's trajectory had just changed forever. Meanwhile, inside Buckingham Palace, a different kind of scene was unfolding. Camilla's personal staff were seen carrying out boxes and garment cases through a side entrance away from the photographers. Each item was handled with care, as though they were relics of a chapter that had ended too soon. There was no official farewell, no ceremonial send-off, only quiet goodbyes whispered between staff members who had shared years of service together. The Queen herself left through the private North Gate, escorted by a single vehicle and minimal security detail. No one waved, no one followed. She slipped away into the London dusk, leaving behind questions that would echo for weeks. That night, as news networks debated the meaning of her departure, King Charles remained unseen. His advisors released a brief note confirming that the documents were authentic and that the transfer had been executed in full accordance with royal and constitutional tradition. But even that reassurance only deepened the mystery. Royal watchers pointed out that there was no constitutional precedent for such an act. So what did tradition mean in this context? Was it a metaphor for royal discretion? Or was there something the public had yet to uncover? As dawn broke over the palace the next day, the British tabloids told the story in bold headlines. Camilla steps down. Kate's new destiny. Charles's bold gamble. Each outlet had its own version of the truth. Some praised the king's transparency, framing it as a masterstroke of modern monarchy, passing the crown's symbolic weight to a new generation. Others saw it as instability, a sign of inner turmoil within the royal household. But beyond the speculation, one sentiment united the public. No one could remember a moment in recent history that had felt this uncertain. For those inside the royal circle, the shock lingered. Even seasoned courtiers admitted privately that they had never witnessed such emotional disarray within the palace. There was respect for Camilla's decision, yes, but also confusion about what it meant for the monarchy's future structure. Would she retain her place beside Charles in private life? Would she retreat entirely from public view? And what role would Kate assume in the interim, symbolic or official? The palace offered no answers, only time. In the days that followed, subtle changes began to appear. Official websites were quietly updated to reflect new phrasing. The order of precedence at upcoming events was reportedly under review. Invitations to state functions were rewritten with certain titles replaced or omitted. These small administrative acts, though discreet, spoke volumes. The monarchy was already adapting to its new reality. But perhaps the most haunting part of that week was the atmosphere within Buckingham Palace itself. Those who worked there described it as eerily still, as though the very walls were holding their breath. The grand halls that once echoed with ceremonial rehearsals now carried only silence. For decades, Camilla's laughter had been part of the palace's rhythm, unpretentious, grounding, human. Now it was gone, replaced by the mechanical ticking of antique clocks and the soft rustle of paperwork as aides tried to maintain normally. For King Charles, that silence must have been deafening. He had spent most of his adult life waiting for the crown, enduring scrutiny that would have broken most men. Yet, when the moment finally arrived, it came with a price. He had always envisioned Camilla by his side, not just as his partner, but as his anchor. Her departure, regardless of the reasons, left a void no title could fill. Some insiders described him as withdrawn in the days following the announcement. Attentive to his duties, but emotionally absent, he performed his role, but his eyes, they said, looked elsewhere across the nation. Debates intensified. Was this decision motivated by compassion, politics, or something darker? Some speculated it was a matter of health, Camilla stepping aside for reasons undisclosed. Others believed it was strategic, a move designed to solidify the monarchy's image under the youthful popularity of William and Kate. There were even whispers, unverifiable but persistent, of growing pressure from within the institution itself, pressure that Charles could no longer ignore. And amid this swirl of speculation, one undeniable truth emerged. The monarchy had entered uncharted territory. For centuries, its greatest strength had been its ability to appear unchanged, eternal. Yet now, in a single week, that illusion had cracked. The public was seeing not a static institution, but a living, breathing family wrestling with human choices, choices of love, legacy, and survival. As the first week ended, the world waited for King Charles to speak directly. When he finally did, his televised address was brief but measured. His tone carried the familiar blend of dignity and melancholy. He spoke of service, of transition, and of gratitude for Camilla's years of support. But those listening closely noticed the pauses between his words, the spaces where emotion broke through protocol. It was a king speaking not as a sovereign, but as a man acknowledging loss. And so the shock that began within Buckingham Palace rippled outward to the nation, to the Commonwealth, to the watching world. The crown remained intact, yet something intangible had shifted. For the first time in modern memory, the monarchy was not only enduring change, it was confessing it. The world had seen a queen step down, a princess rise, and a king quietly bear the consequences of both. Yet behind every headline, one question remained unanswered. What had truly driven this decision? And within that unanswered question lay the next chapter of the story, the truth that would test not just the monarchy's stability, but its very soul. The documents that King Charles released were more than just ceremonial papers. They were the written manifestation of a decision that would echo through generations. Neatly folded within the royal crest and sealed in crimson wax, these pages bore a weight far heavier than ink and parchment could contain. When they were first unveiled, few understood their full significance, but those who read them closely realized immediately that this was not a mere formality. It was a declaration that marked the beginning of a new unpredictable era within the British monarchy. In the formal language of state, the documents outlined a voluntary reassignment of titular responsibility. Words that at first glance seemed clinical, even mundane, but in the context of the monarchy, they were revolutionary. The phrase implied that Queen Camilla, by her own consent, was surrendering the privileges, responsibilities, and constitutional recognition of her position to Catherine, Princess of Wales. It was an act unprecedented in modern history. The last time a queen consort had renounced a title of her own volition, the empire had been ruled by kings whose portraits now hung in faded galleries, their names known only to historians. Within minutes of the release, experts began dissecting every sentence. Royal correspondents noted that the document carried not only the king's signature, but also his personal seal, a gesture reserved for matters of the highest privacy and consequence. It bore the date, the place of issue, and the unmistakable tone of a man who had spent sleepless nights arriving at an impossible choice. The language was respectful yet decisive. There were no hesitations, no conditional phrasing. the transfer was final. For those who had followed Charles's reign since his coronation, the timing of the release was baffling. There had been no public scandal, no visible breakdown within the royal marriage. In fact, in recent appearances, the king and queen had seemed united, sharing quiet smiles at charity events, exchanging small glances that spoke of long familiarity. Yet the documents told a different story, a story of transition, perhaps even resignation. The public wanted answers, but the palace offered none. Behind closed doors, those answers were complex. The process that led to the drafting of those papers had begun months earlier. During a series of private consultations between the king, his closest advisors, and the constitutional office responsible for royal protocol. At first, the discussions were hypothetical, an exploration of succession planning, of ensuring continuity in the face of the king's advancing age and rumored health challenges. But as the meetings continued, they took on a more personal tone. Charles was reportedly insistent that the monarchy must not only survive him, but also evolve beyond him. Camilla's name entered those discussions not as a point of contention, but as one of concern. She had never sought grandeur. Her strength had always been in quiet support in grounding the king when duty consumed him. Yet, as the pressures of public life mounted, and as whispers about her health and fatigue began to circulate, it became clear that something had to give. The role of queen consort, though often ceremonial, demands an unrelenting schedule of appearances, briefings, and representational duties. To outsiders, it looks glamorous. To insiders, it is exhausting. It was during one of those private meetings, according to palace aides, that Camilla first voiced her willingness to step back. She was not coerced, nor was she cast aside. Instead, she reportedly expressed her concern that her continued presence might hinder the next phase of the monarchy's renewal. Charles resisted the idea at first. His loyalty to her had been the cornerstone of his personal and public life. But Camilla's tone was firm, reflective. She reminded him, as she had so many times before, that the crown was not a possession, but a trust. And trust, she said, must sometimes be passed on before it is lost. That single conversation became the seed from which the documents would grow. The king, though torn, began instructing his legal and constitutional teams to explore what such a transition might look like. They drafted proposals, debated language, and wrestled with precedent that simply didn't exist. For weeks, the palace lawyers pored over centuries of royal statutes, searching for any framework that could support such a move. They found fragments of old traditions, scattered references from the Tudor and early Hanoverian eras, but nothing that matched the present reality. What they were about to do would have to stand on its own. When the first draft was placed on the king's desk, he reportedly spent hours reading it in silence. Each word seemed to weigh upon him. To sign it would be to acknowledge that his reign was entering a new phase, one that would rely less on the partnership that had defined his life and more on the legacy he would leave behind. It was said that he paused several times, setting down his pen, staring into the distance as though measuring the cost. Finally, he called for Camilla. No one outside that room knows exactly what was said, but those who saw them afterward described a quiet understanding between them. There were no tears, no visible anger, only the kind of mutual resignation that comes from two people who have faced every trial together and know when it's time to yield to the inevitable. When Camilla left the study that evening, her expression was calm. She had made her peace with the decision. Charles, however, was visibly shaken. That night, he did not attend his usual dinner with staff. He remained in his private quarters long after midnight. The signed papers locked in a folder before him. When the document was finalized, it contained more than just legal phrasing. It carried symbolic weight. The section outlining the title transfer was meticulously worded, ensuring that no disrespect or diminution would fall upon Camilla. It referred to her years of service, her unwavering devotion to crown and country, and her desire that the institution may continue to prosper under renewed strength. It was in essence a love letter disguised as a constitutional statement, but it also contained one line that would ignite endless speculation. Toward the end, in an almost poetic flourish, the king wrote that the title of queen would be entrusted to the care and conduct of Her Royal Highness Catherine, Princess of Wales, whose grace and steadfastness have proven the enduring spirit of service. Those words transformed what could have been a bureaucratic act into a moment of generational symbolism. It was a passing of the torch, not just of titles, but of moral authority. The document's release sent shock waves far beyond Britain. In Commonwealth nations, where the monarchy's relevance had been waning, it sparked a renewed debate about what it meant to modernize. In Canada and Australia, news anchors asked whether this was the king's attempt to ensure that the institution survived in an era of skepticism. In the Caribbean, republic movements saw it as a sign that even the crown understood its fragility. Every interpretation carried its own narrative, but all agreed on one point: history was being rewritten in real time. For the British government, the situation posed its own challenges. The constitutional implications were unclear. Could a queen consort truly transfer her title without parliamentary consultation? What precedent would this set for future monarchs? Behind the scenes, senior ministers reportedly held emergency briefings to ensure that the king's decision did not conflict with any constitutional boundaries. Their conclusion was pragmatic. As long as the act did not alter the line of succession or the sovereign's authority, it could stand as a royal prerogative. That legal approval, discreetly communicated to the palace, gave Charles the green light to proceed. But legality was only one part of the equation. The emotional consequences were far greater. Those close to the king said that he became quieter in the days that followed, reflective and withdrawn. When he met with advisers, his words were few. One aide described him as a man carrying the full weight of his own crown. For Camilla, the transition was equally complex. Though she had publicly expressed no regret, her friends noted that she had begun spending more time at Raymell House, her private residence, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. It was as if she were returning to a world that existed